In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King begins a visit to Beijing tomorrow, seeking closer economic ties with China. Germany urges European partners to take in more refugees as Europe struggles to cope with the record influx of asylum seekers. And France says it will begin reconnaissance missions over Syria tomorrow and is considering launching airstrikes against Daesh terrorists in the country. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King called Saudi monarch Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud to express his condolences over the death of a number of Saudi servicemen in the line of duty in Yemen. King Abdullah expressed Jordan's solidarity with the Saudi kingdom and the families of the fallen soldiers. His Majesty the King begins a visit to China tomorrow as Jordan seeks to open new scopes of economic ties with Beijing in investment, trade and energy fields. Economists say the visit will culminate in launching more joint ventures, particularly in the renewable energy field. King Abdullah will hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping and other senior officials on bilateral ties and regional and international developments. He will also meet Chinese economic and business leaders to showcase economic opportunities Jordan offers. Another highlight of the King's trip is attending the opening ceremony of the second China Arab State Expo in the city of Yinchuan, where Jordan will be the honored guest. After Beijing, King Abdullah will visit Seoul for similar talks with South Korean leaders. A royal decree was issued adding 2 key items to the agenda of the lower house's current extraordinary session. The Parliament will take up the 2015 draft elections law, which was unveiled by the government last week, and the Officers' Service Law of the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army. His Majesty the King honored His Royal Highness Prince Al Hassan bin Talal with the Order of the Hashemite Star in recognition of his outstanding contributions and services to the kingdom for many years. During a ceremony on the 25th anniversary of the Jordan Hashemite Charity Organization, the King also bestowed upon His Royal Highness Prince Rashid ibn al-Hassan the Order of Hussein ibn Ali of First Class for his service as head of the charity organization's Board of Trustees. The King also conferred the Order of the Independence of First Class on the Civil Military Affairs Directorate at the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army and the Hashemite Charity Organization's former chiefs in recognition for their noble humanitarian service. The ceremony at Basman Palace was attended by senior civic and military officials and a number of supporters of the charity organization's humanitarian work. The King and those present watched a movie that highlighted the organization's achievements over the past years. Also today, King Abdullah accepted the credentials of 8 newly appointed ambassadors accredited to the Royal Hashemite Court. The envoys are Enrique Rojo Stein of Mexico, Francisco Carlos Suarez Luz of Brazil, Bilal Rabi' Abdur of the United Arab Emirates, Hans-Peter Lenz of the Swiss Confederation, Belgium's Hendrik van de Velde, Israel's Einat Schlein, Italy's Giovanni Brause, and German Ambassador Birgitta Zivka Eberle. Upon arrival at the Basman Palace for the ceremony, the King reviewed a guard of honor as a military band played the national anthems of Jordan and the countries of the envoys. The new diplomats laid wreaths on the tombs of late King Hussein bin Talal, King Abdullah bin al-Hussein I, and King Talal bin Abdullah. Over to Europe's migrant crisis. Struggling to cope with the record influx of asylum seekers crossing the border into Europe, Germany told its European partners they must take in more refugees. The Czech Republic and Slovakia stuck to their rejection of quotas for redistributing asylum seekers flooding Europe. The International Organization for Migration says more than 5,000 migrants and refugees per day have crossed the Aegean Sea into Greece over the past week. This report has more.
Europe is in the grip of unprecedented human crisis. Leaders are yet to forge a common approach as migrants continue to pour into European countries to flee wars, dreaming of a better life, far from the poverty and upheaval of their unstable countries. The head of the UN's refugee agency, Antonio Guterres, urged European Union states to make fundamental changes in policy to take in more refugees. He warned that a divided EU would benefit only smugglers and traffickers.
Ce que nous assistons aujourd'hui, c'est une situation chaotique.
Or of making little adjustments to the policies currently in place. It is really a step forward that is required so that Europe can give a positive response to the expectations of people who are desperate, in particular Syrians, who have already suffered greatly.
As part of EU plans to welcome more than 100,000 in the next 2 years, French President François Hollande said his country is ready to take in 24,000 refugees.
France is willing to do its part, which will mean 24,000 people for France to take in. We will do it.
Also, British Prime Minister David Cameron pledged to take in up to 20,000 refugees from camps in Syria over the next 5 years.
We've already provided sanctuary to more than 5,000 Syrians in Britain and have introduced a specific resettlement scheme alongside those we already have to help those Syrian refugees particularly at risk. But given the scale of the crisis and the suffering of the Syrian people, it is right that we should do much more. So, Mr. Speaker, we are proposing that Britain should resettle up to 20,000 Syrian refugees over the rest of this Parliament.
Germany Chancellor Angela Merkel called for a strengthened European response to the current refugee crisis.
Germany is willing to take in refugees, but they can find shelter in every country of the European Union in a way which guarantees them protection from persecution and civil war.
And as the inflow of migrants continued, Europe's Migration Commissioner Dimitris Avramopoulos said he is counting on the EU states to support proposals the bloc's chief executive will present on Wednesday to tackle the refugee crisis.
No member state in the European Union can address this issue alone. We can only overcome this crisis if we act as a true union, if we act with responsibility and solidarity.
As politicians across Europe are still debating where the latest influx of refugees will be housed, former Hungarian Prime Minister Ferenc Gyurcsány has opened his home to the refugees, embracing a family in their house and garden. Loy Balkar for the news at 10.
The United Nations Food Agency said it's cutting back aid for Syrian refugees in Jordan. The World Food Programme cited a funding crisis for the move, which will affect about 300,000 refugees in the kingdom. Here's more.
Syria's ongoing civil war is taking a heavy humanitarian toll on neighboring countries. Jordan is in the forefront of the regional countries struggling to cope with the influx of refugees from its war-torn neighbor amid a severe shortfall in foreign aid funding. The United Nations World Food Programme served notice it has stopped assistance to 229,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan due to funding shortages. But the agency will continue to provide for 211,000 refugees as well as 96,000 refugees inside the camps.
The World Food Programme since the beginning of the year has been facing a critical funding shortfall, which means that we have had to make very difficult decisions to focus our current resources on the people who need help most. All of the refugees that we have been helping in the past few years are in need, but at varying levels, and we have conducted comprehensive assessments to determine the levels of vulnerability among refugees, and we are now focusing on those families who are extremely vulnerable, who cannot get by without external assistance.
In determining the most vulnerable families, The WFP considered the number of family members, health and living conditions, as well as income. But Al-Kasabi said that those who would no longer receive assistance were likely to resort to extreme measures to get by.
We already know that the longer the crisis goes on, the more vulnerable and the more dire families' situation becomes. And we know from our meetings with refugees that they're already skipping meals, eating lower quality food, and taking extreme measures like taking their children out of school and sending them to work, or marrying their daughters off early so that it's one less mouth to feed to get by.
According to the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, Jordan hosts about 630,000 Syrian refugees, with more than 500,000 living in local communities and the rest in camps. In addition to reducing the number of voucher recipients, the aid agency has drastically reduced the value of the vouchers. Syrians now receive $13 per person per month for urban refugees in Jordan and Lebanon, while those living in camps still receive the full $28 a month.
With regards to the humanitarian assistance that have been discontinued for some Syrian people, this will negatively impact them and will cause some people to go hungry, and they will not be able to sustain their daily life. We call upon all the humanitarian and international aid agencies to work on resuming at least part of this assistance.
It will definitely affect us. We relied heavily on the food vouchers. Now they have stopped this. And I have young children, as you can see. We have young kids, and we don't know how we will get by.
According to Al-Kasabi, to continue assisting Syrian refugees in the region, as well as those displaced families that are in need inside Syria, the World Food Programme needs an immediate $341 million cash injection to get them through to the end of the year. UNHCR estimates that more than 4 million Syrians have fled the Syrian conflict over the 4-year crisis. Hala Debabne for the News at 10.
Qatar is reported to have sent 1,000 ground troops to Yemen, escalating Gulf Arab intervention in the Yemeni war. Doha-based Al Jazeera television said Qatari pilots had already joined months of Saudi-led airstrikes on the Houthi militias, which seized Sana'a a year ago and then advanced across much of the country. The reported involvement of Qatari ground troops came amid an escalation of the conflict days after a missile strike that killed dozens of Gulf Arab soldiers. Saudi-led warplanes renewed strikes on Houthi targets across Yemen. Houthi-run media said the raids killed at least 12 people in the central province of Ib. Saudi-led fighter jets pounded the Yemeni capital Sana'a, reducing homes and buildings to rubble across the capital and leaving at least 9 people dead and 25 wounded. Britain has killed 2 of its nationals in Syria, suspected of fighting for Daesh terror group with a drone strike. Prime Minister David Cameron told Parliament that 1 Briton was killed in a precision airstrike carried out by a remotely piloted aircraft last month. 2 others travelling with the man, including another Briton, were also killed. Britain conducts regular attacks in neighbouring Iraq and flies drones over Syria to gather intelligence on Daesh group. But unlike some other coalition partners, it does not target Daesh positions in Syria, as Cameron had failed to get the go-ahead from Parliament to do so. France, meanwhile, said it will begin reconnaissance missions over Syria tomorrow and is considering launching airstrikes against Daesh militants in the country. But President François Hollande ruled out sending ground troops.
I consider that it would be inconsequential and unrealistic to send French troops on the ground in Syria. Unrealistic because we would be alone. Inconsequential because it would mean turning an operation into an occupation force. So we will not intervene on the ground as much as we are not intervening in Iraq.
French President François Hollande. Turkish warplanes bombed Kurdish rebel targets after the militants staged one of their deadliest attacks since the collapse of a 2-year-old ceasefire back in July. The Turkish military said the attack by the Kurdish Workers' Party PKK left 16 government soldiers dead. An army statement also said another 6 soldiers were wounded. The military said its aircraft bombed 23 Kurdish insurgent targets in a mountainous area near the Iraqi frontier. The clashes threaten the peace process President Tayyip Erdogan launched in 2012 in an attempt to end an insurgency that has killed more than 40,000 people. Erdogan said in an interview the fight against the PKK would now become more determined. He said 2,000 PKK militants had been killed since the conflict resumed in July. The mother of 18-month-old Palestinian toddler Ali Dawabshi, who was burned alive in an arson attack by Israeli extremists on July the 31st, died from her injuries. Rihan Dawabshi has been fighting for her life for over a month. The 26-year-old mother had suffered third-degree burns to at least 80% of her body in the firebombing in the village of Douma in the northern West Bank. Jewish settlers threw flammable liquids and Molotov cocktails inside 2 homes in that incident. Her husband, Saad Dawabshi, also died from his injuries 8 days after the attack, while 4-year-old Ali, another son of the couple, is still in hospital. Now, let's take you to Crimea, where over a dozen rare white lion and Siberian tiger cubs were let loose to frolic with delighted visitors at a safari park. The park gives visitors the chance to hug and pet the adorable cubs. Serena Williams moved within 3 wins of achieving the 4th women's calendar year Grand Slam by routing fellow American Madison Keys. Williams beat the 20-year-old Keys 6-3, 6-3 in 68 minutes to book a 27th professional career showdown with her older sister Venus Williams. 3 times defending champion Serena holds a 15-11 advantage in the sisterly head-to-head series against Venus, splitting their 4 previous clashes at the US Open.
Set match, Williams by 6-3.
In the men's draw, top seed Novak Djokovic was made to work hard by Spain's Roberto Bautista before he posted a 6-3, 4-6, 6-4, 6-3 win, moving him into his 26th consecutive Grand Slam quarter-final. Djokovic will meet Spain's Feliciano Lopez, who beat Italy's Fabio Fognini. To Brazil and the beach volleyball test event at the Rio Open, Latvian Aleksandrs Samoilovs and Jānis Smīdens won the men's gold medal match. The pair defeated Markus Bockermann and Lars Flugen of Germany in 2 straight sets. And the women's final was an all-Brazilian affair. Favourites Larissa Franca and Thalita Antunes beat rivals, and second seeds Agatha Bednarsuc and Barbara Seixas. But the top seeds needed 3 sets to do it, winning 32-30, 18-21 and then 15-12 in the decider, over an hour and 11 minutes in total. Now, a look at the weather forecast. Moderate tonight across the hilly areas and relatively hot in the Jordan Valley and the Gulf of Aqaba, although slightly crossing the 30-degree mark at the Dead Sea. Tomorrow, hot and dry weather will prevail countrywide and dusty across the country's east. Temperatures will be around 4 to 6 degrees above seasonal average. Winds will be northwesterly brisk. Now, a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. To close our top stories once again. His Majesty the King begins a visit to Beijing tomorrow, seeking closer economic ties with China. Germany urges European partners to take in more refugees as Europe struggles to cope with the record influx of asylum seekers. And France says it will begin reconnaissance missions over Syria tomorrow and is considering launching airstrikes against Daesh militants in the country. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. My name is Raad Al-Btoush. Thanks for watching.